Hello, everyone. A very good evening and good morning for those of you who are joining us from the West Coast. A very good afternoon for those of us who are joining Central Time. Welcome to our dialogue series talking about transitions, and particularly today's dialogue on imagining sustainable futures of AI. I'm going to kickstart the conversation with a little bit of an introduction of our panelists and what the dialogue entails today. And for you, I am Leanne D'Souza. I will be moderating today's dialogue, and I am a research associate at Transitions Research. At Transitions, my work focuses primarily on the intersection of law, AI, and sustainability. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time in these dialogue series, Transitions Research is a social science research collective based out of Goa. We are a team of highly interdisciplinary researchers, and we work together to examine radical transitions that are shaping at the intersection of technology, society, and sustainability broadly. And through this dialogue series that we call Talking About Transitions, we hope to seed conversations and reflections on these transitions particularly. And today's dialogue will focus on understanding what the sustainability of AI really means and how the future of a sustainable AI can shape up. For today's dialogue, we really have a very special set of panelists who have joined us from across the world. And I would like to take a moment or so to introduce them, to give our participants and also our audiences a background of where we have perspectives and thoughts coming across the board during this dialogue. So first and foremost, we have Adil. Adil Buglala is a Netherlands-based researcher at the Inclusive AI Lab at Utrecht University, which among other areas on artificial intelligence and digital technologies focuses on sustainability dimensions of AI, particularly in relation to Global South contexts. The Inclusive AI Lab's mission is to incubate leaders and help build inclusive and sustainable AI data, tools, services, and platforms. Adil's work sits at the intersection of fashion, visual media, and digital culture. He examines how these domains converge and what cultural implications emerge from that overlap. And his research agenda centers on how digitalization and AI-driven systems influence broader societal and cultural transformations, with particular attention to themes such as sustainability, circularity, and equity, with more focus on fashion and creative industries. Other scholarly contributions include work tracing the histories and cultural dynamics of digital fashion, alongside critical studies of embodiment, online consumption, and the way sustainability is imagined and communicated within digital and AI-driven fashion environments. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, Adil. We are also joined by Dr. Devyani Pandey. Devyani is an assistant professor of public policy at the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. She brings over a decade of experience in academic research. Her work sits at the intersection of technology, public policy, and public perception of emerging innovations and institutional design of regulations. Her areas of interest lie in examining how legal and policy frameworks can effectively respond to rapidly evolving technologies, such as AI, micro-mobility systems, and autonomous platforms. Devyani's scholarship thus far reflects both conceptual and applied inquiry. Her past work clearly examines how public trust is constructed and negotiated in contexts of high AI governance. She has explored the regulatory ambiguities surrounding powered micro-mobility devices and also analyzed system barriers that data sharing in the landscape of disruptive technologies. Her work largely has contributed through a sustained engagement with legal, behavioral, and governance challenges posed by next-generational technological systems. Thank you, Devyani, for joining us. I warmly welcome you.
Thanks, Leanne.
And last but not the least, we have Jose Renato. Jose is a co-founder of the Brazilian think tank Laboratory of Public Policy and Internet, and he is also a PhD researcher at the University of Bonn's Sustainable AI Lab. He has served as a UNESCO consultant for Brazil's 2024 G20 presidency, where he contributed to Digital Economy Working Group with a focus on information integrity and artificial intelligence. His research broadly examines the societal impacts of digital technologies, with particular attention to environmental sustainability of AI and its effects on indigenous communities in Brazil. He has critically analyzed AI regulatory frameworks, more so in context of the EU AI Act, for overlooking issues related to environmental protection and climate change. And his work explores the implications of digital sovereignty and AI for indigenous populations. Welcome, Jose. We are very excited to have all of you on this panel. I'm very much excited to get into a deep dive of the conversations. But for our participants who have joined us today, I would like to just take a minute or so from your time to just lay the context for this conversation that we're going to have. And then I'll yield the floor to our panelists with particular questions. So to understand a little more about the discussion for all our participants who have joined us here today, I will begin with a brief setting of the context. And the context is this, that around the world, we see countries today racing to really expand their AI capabilities and capture its transformative potential. And this is very evident from the scale of investment to address this urgency and this priority. We see that the OECD has estimated that as of 2025, global private investment in AI has already reached about $259 billion. And governments are not so far behind this private investment. As we see very close to home, earlier this year, India alone had received about $250 billion pledge towards its AI infrastructural development. Now, much of this momentum for the investment in AI infrastructure is driven in part by the promise that AI brings as a very important tool and as a lever of sorts for many purposes, which also includes achieving sustainability goals. We see how AI is being used for sustainability goals such as biodiversity monitoring, climate modeling, energy systems, and urban planning. But this is only one side of the story. The development and deployment of contemporary AI systems and large language models are themselves very deeply resource intensive. Data centers consume significant amount of water and they depend on rare minerals and globally distributed supply chains. Training large models require enormous computational power, and rapid hardware turnover also contributes to this ever-growing issue of electronic waste. But the challenge doesn't stop there. The challenge is not only environmental. We see AI also raising important questions about equity, access, and power. As AI systems scale globally, technical expertise, infrastructure, and decision-making capacities often remain concentrated in a very small number of institutions and regions. And this can in turn reinforce existing inequalities in access to digital capabilities. It may also shape whose priorities, knowledge systems, and futures are represented by this very rapidly developing AI. So as nations really continue to scale their AI ambitions, it's quite apposite for us today to ask, what would a truly sustainable future of AI look like? What alternatives are emerging? And what are the key leverage points for aligning AI innovation and within its ecological limits, within context of social justice, and with equitable outcomes? And in order to answer these questions, I would like to now take this opportunity to turn to our panelists to really invite them to share their insights on this. And so without further ado, I would like to start with the first question. And for this, Jose, I would like to set the stage by turning to you and to ask the primary question of what would sustainable AI futures really look like, especially for developing countries or countries in the global south. And if I could invite you to reflect on what you understand the sustainability of AI to really mean, and how do you think this is shaping up to be more so for the future? Jose, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lian. It's a great pleasure to be here. I thank you for the invitation and also say hi to my panelists, colleagues here in this panel and also to the audience. This has been a lot of what I've been looking into in the last few years, I would say. And maybe we should start, and I think your question is really interestingly framed on the idea of futures, because sustainability, when we think of AI, sustainability is, and I think especially in the global south as a whole, it has a lot to do with what we want for our future, especially when we consider its dialogue with the idea of sovereignty that so many of our countries have been used to frame their AI policies, their incentives, their regulations, and etc. And well, to start with, like the concept of sustainability within AI, like of sustainability of AI, um, I think that, well, first of all, it relates a lot to the idea of like building AI models and infrastructure in a more sustainable way. And actually, this started with a whole discussion like how much are we expending of energy, how much carbon we are emitting when we are developing these models. But then I think that the discussion has evolved a lot to also encompass what a colleague of mine here at the University of Bonn, Larissa Bolte, she talks about a structural turn in a dialogue on AI ethics, which also starts to include the role of infrastructure in assessing its environmental impacts. It's like when we think, for instance, that ChatGPT to train GPT-4, OpenAI used around 7 tons of toxic minerals, and that data centers are had just in the last year a surge in the consumption of energy of more than 50%. I think that all of these discussions should take part when we're talking about sustainability of AI. Also, when we consider that AI is being used for warfare, which is per se, of course, not just create like, of course, many human casualties, but also destroys completely many environments. And it's used in very polluting industries as well. We have seen all of this happening in the last few years. So I think that for us to think about sustainable AI, first, I think that it is important to acknowledge that hardly will AI be sustainable because it depends on the extraction of minerals, which for centuries, and I think all of our countries are really well aware of that. For centuries, it has been destroying communities, it has been destroying its territories. So it is hard to think of a 100% sustainable form of developing digital technologies, AI included. So I think that we have to start discussing, well, having that in mind, what kind of digital future do we want? And I think this goes directly to your question. And when we like since this conversation is hosted in India and my experiences from Brazil, I think that we have to think what is the role that our countries have to play in the development of these technologies, in the advancement of of this sector. So, like, should we be creators? Should be reproducers? Should we be merely resource providers? And what tech do we want to foster at all? Because I think that it is very easy for us to fall into a trap that AI will be a panacea for solving our inequalities, for tackling climate change. I mean, if you go to a UNFCCC conference, that's what it pretty much looks like. So I think that we have to understand what is the kind of technology that we really want, and also assess what dependencies do we have, because by analyzing exactly what we want, I think we already exclude by excluding what we don't want, we start already by understanding how we can reduce the amount of destruction that we are creating when we are developing these technologies. And just to make it a bit more concrete, my work lately has been exactly on trying to go a little bit beyond these statistics, which are extremely important for us to analyze more broadly what is the footprint of AI technologies and infrastructure, but also to understand the stories that are being hidden when we talk about the territories that are being destroyed for the sake of advancing these technologies. And that's why I have been looking into the construction of a specific data center in Brazil, which is being built in a territory which has been for decades an object of dispute of an indigenous community called the Anasé people. And basically, it builds upon many methods of disappropriation that this community has faced, and also of violence, of genocide that they have feared in the last 100 years. And so this is a new layer in this process of exclusion of marginalization, of further marginalization of this community. So, and within the stories also, for instance, what is it that a river that is in this territory and from which the data centers will consume water, what does it mean for this community? What the land means? What the relationship with the space means for them? So I think that this is very important. And to finalize, I think that in a conversation with the leader of the NSS, who is Cacique Roberto, he made a comparison which for me was outstanding, and I think it relates a lot when we talk about it is very important when we talk about digital futures. When the Portuguese came to Brazil, one of the gifts that they gave to the indigenous peoples were mirrors, and in order to get their sympathy. And Cacique Roberto, he told me that, look, it seems like this AI thing is but another mirror that they give in us. Because in the end, even though it looks something very advanced and which will help so much us in like tackling our inequalities, in addressing climate change, in the end, what it's actually doing is destroying our territory, extracting our data, and creating new forms of exploitation and deepening ancient forms, as you said in your presentation, in your introduction. So I think that when we talk about sustainability, we have to have all of this in mind. So to finalize, like I think I said many stuff here, but I think that as we evolve in the conversation, we can dive deeper into the specificities of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose, to really bring this conversation on what transitions is also very interested in understanding the futures. At this juncture, I open this platform to Adil and Devyani since I believe both of you do some work in the Global South context. And we are really trying to contextualize a conversation of imagining what sustainability really means beyond environmental implications and what this would mean in Global South contexts. In addition to what Jose pointed out about raising questions of appropriation, sovereignty, and autonomy, do you see any other facets coming into this idea of sustainability of AI which become relevant for Global South or majority world countries?
Yeah, maybe I can respond to that. Very interesting points that Jose also raised. I think for me, when I think of sustainability and AI, I think of terms of imaginaries, the desired or even promised futures. And I think just responding to you, Leon, about the Global South context, from a critical cultural studies perspective, sustainability is also about power. Like Jose already mentioned, like who owns infrastructures, who controls the data, but also whose cultures and languages are represented in AI systems and who benefits economically. So to me, sustainability is not just about environmental or material issues, but also about social, cultural, economic, political, and infrastructural issues. So I think if we're thinking of imagining a desired future, we should take these things into account. One other thing that I also find very important is that sustainable AI futures should also protect cultural sustainability. It should preserve local knowledge systems. It should preserve linguistic diversity, but also creative practices rather than just homogenizing them. So I think that Jose already mentions quite a lot of very important points that we should always take into account when thinking of the future. And maybe also one more thing that I also find interesting is that a lot of discourse surrounding sustainability and AI is centered on this idea of the immateriality or the virtuality of AI. And in that context, people often forget the highly material infrastructures, data centers, mineral extraction, water use, but also the hidden forms of labor. I think it's a whole specter of facets that you just cannot ignore when you want to imagine a sustainable future through AI.
All right. I think, Adil, that points me very naturally to the next question. I think Jose laid a very natural path as a corollary to this conversation of we're looking about how sustainability is much more than material constructs, but it's also about understanding immateriality. It's about understanding rights. And so I'd like to jump into this question of really understanding choices and voices of um, who are really stakeholders when it comes to really shaping conversations of sustainable AI. And so, Adil, I'd like to pose this question to you, since you set the stage for this. Is as AI capabilities expand and countries are doing so at a much faster pace, what choices you think will matter most for ensuring that these communities whom you pointed out to be marginalized, benefit from this advancement? What choices do you think will really matter most for countries and various?
Mhm. Great question. Thank you very much. I think one of the most important questions, or one of the most important choices actually, is whether AI systems, whether nations that are developing AI systems, whether they are developing them in ways that share the benefits broadly across communities and regions, rather than just concentrating on power, resources, and decision making that ultimately ends up in the hands of just a few actors. So, for example, one of the major risks that I see nowadays is infrastructural inequality. There's exclusion in the forms of not being able to access technology, but there's also exclusion in the form of, participation, being able to voice and to help shape technological futures. So I think at the moment, AI benefits, they kind of tend to concentrate in regions with computational resources, technical expertise, and capital investment. So I think in the context of the Global South, for examples, communities are often the providers of labor, the providers of data and raw materials, but the benefits aren't shared equally, the social and the economic benefits. So even though sustainable AI debates sometimes focus heavily on, carbon efficiency, and those types of concept, they kind of usually neglect labor exploitation, digital colonialism, and uneven access. And I think these are just a few infrastructural inequalities that really need to be addressed when talking about sustainable AI. So I can only echo what I just said. Like, it's not an environmental issue. So I think these types of choices are very important and should really be taken seriously when addressing AI. Yeah, I think that's the important.
All right. Um, that's very insightful. And building on that, Adil, and I'd like to invite Jose and Divyani also to chime in here, is Adil very pointedly mentioned that um, some of the choices will be rooted in understanding who's marginalized and how access barriers are really addressed in not only in terms of benefits, but also in terms of challenges that arise, and extending this idea of, or rather extending this point of looking at barriers to access. I also invite you to comment on what do you see are biggest risks of inclusion for emerging across different sectors, geographies, or populations. I'll of course come to the sectoral point a little more closely following this, but maybe Devyani, if you'd like to speak on this in context of the Global South or even generally.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Jose and Adil, for just setting the backdrop on sustainability. And I just want to start by saying that the sustainable future of AI would depends not just on looking at models, but looking at governance arrangements in general. And when I say this, I'd like to pick up something from the research that I'm doing on what's happening in India. So there was a lot of Jose and Adil said that, the voices would matter a lot more when we're looking at sustainable futures of AI. And rightly so. I mean, looking at who are the actors involved in governing AI right now in India, in a global South country like India, would be very important. So, if we were to look at the different models of governance that are in place right now, I would look at the EU model and what is happening in the United States and perhaps what's happening in China. So, China is a very top down sort of governance arrangement. So I don't think there's a lot of choice on the part of maybe the public there. But in terms of what's happening in the EU and the US, the EU follows a more rights-based approach where they've classified AI systems on the basis of risks. So they've said that, AI systems will be prohibited if they are very, very, very high risk. And that's the risk category of prohibited AI. And then they have high risk AI systems where there are a lot of regulations involved. There are conformity assessments that have to be undertaken by AI developers and manufacturers. And then there's a lower risk category and so on and so forth. So that's the model of the EU, which is way more centralized as compared to the US, which follows a very decentralized sort of governance system where each of the states have their own autonomy and they keep coming out with executive orders and rules and guidelines. And what India is sort of following might be a mix of this. So the foundation, in case of India, in terms of how AI should be developed, was laid by Niti Aayog, which is the government's think tank. And they said that we should have responsible AI and AI for all. Now, what does responsible AI entail? So, responsible AI entails a lot of values like non-discrimination, reliability, safety. That an AI system should enable privacy, should be secure, should be transparent, should be explainable, and all these are in line with the OECD guidelines as well. What I want to bring, I think, what I want to focus on is what I started with, that what's the importance of voices. And here I want to get in who are the stakeholders involved in the Indian AI landscape when it comes to governance. So we have civil society members, we have the big tech, which are obviously Microsoft, Google, these are the dominant tech companies. And then, of course, we have the government. Interestingly, what's happening in India is that civil society tends to adopt a very broad and critical understanding of sustainability, which is linked to exactly what Adil and Jose were saying, that it's linked to justice, it's linked to human rights, democratic governance, inclusion, and not exclusion of marginalized communities. And it's a very rights-based approach as opposed to, say, what the corporates or the big techs are talking about. And most of their reports talk about how innovation is way more important. And they sort of don't say that rights are as important as innovation. And that's sort of a very important, significant inference in terms of the voices that are coming across about governance, that even the government is saying that, okay, we need responsible AI. And the civil society is saying, but we need like a rights-based approach. And not so much of like this rapid innovation that's happening without regulations. And whereas the corporate sectors or the corporate sector or the companies are saying that we should push for innovation and there should be self-auditing, there should be voluntary standards, as opposed to what say civil society organizations or research organizations are saying, that the government should come in. And there's a bit of a heavy-handedness that's required instead of a very light touch approach that the government right now is sort of portraying through the recent, actually, the AI governance guidelines, which came out in February this year. So yeah, that's what I wanted to contribute in terms of what are the different voices when it comes to governance arrangements of AI.
Right. Thank you, Devyani, for foregrounding it in context of India. And that actually points me to this question of really understanding priorities. As you pointed out, that back home here in India, for us, at least you and I, and a couple of our participants, it seems like the priority is innovation and technological development. And while that is a priority for many countries, I would also like to ask maybe Adil and Jose, as especially for global South countries who are trying to make up their way on this ladder of innovation and technological development, how do you think such countries could best navigate through different priorities and trade-offs, such as the speed and cost of innovation, um, as against inclusion and environmental responsibility and socio-cultural considerations? Jose, would you like to chime in, or maybe Adil?
Do you want to go ahead? I saw that you had unmuted your microphone.
No,
Free
I
to do
just
so.
had I think I have also a way to kind of respond to Devyani, because I think hearing her answer, it really reminded me that there is, for countries such as India and for other countries in the global south, there really is a huge opportunity to imagine alternative AI futures rather than just reproducing, these Silicon Valley models or the other models that Devyani mentioned, which are way more centered on, endless scale and extraction. And I think countries in the global south, they could really prioritize a more appropriate type of AI that's maybe smaller scale or like context sensitive, that requires lower resource systems, but also that is designed around local needs rather than global needs, rather than needs of endless innovation that we all know is very damaging. So I think we should avoid assuming that faster scaling automatically equals, most progress. So I think it's an issue of innovation that needs to be reevaluated in non-Western context, really. So thank you for bringing that up, Devyani. It's really, I think there's a huge opportunity there.
All right. Thank you, Adil. Yes, Jose, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think that first of all, we should stop working as if we were indeed in this AI race. I think this is a trap, I don't think that we can see ourselves. First of all, I don't think that the AI race thing is a narrative. I don't think that necessarily there is something that we should be competing against each other instead of thinking of it as an arms race thing. As I think that the US is framing a lot, and global media as a whole. And I agree a lot with what Adil said of thinking about global needs, also because this is sorry, not global needs, but local needs, the exact opposite. Because it is easy for us to fall into another development trap, I think, which is in the end, even when we think internally in the sense of let's push forward what we want, it is very easy for, in the end, the ones establishing the agenda being the same national elites, the hegemonic players that we have internally. That I think we all share an understanding of how this happens, and so I think that this is the direction. In the case of Brazil, what not only myself isolatedly, but also my organization and other organizations have also been talking about is the importance of strengthening, for instance, universities in their capacity to develop this technology. So, not just in terms of capacity building, but also providing them with the infrastructure necessary to come to develop advanced systems that tackle our necessities. And just to bring a very short story, I have a colleague here who's also Brazilian at the University of Bonn, and he was able to develop an LLM model fully in Portuguese, just with the infrastructure that the university provided. Of course, that we're talking about very different degrees of funding that a university in Germany and a university in Brazil have. But I think that this is the kind of model that we should be thinking about. How do we create an environment where students, professors, and communities, especially social movements, can together create technologies that address their needs? And to finalize, the example of a social movement in Brazil called Homeless Workers Movement is very interesting, because they have a proposal of a popular digital sovereignty that is driven by civil society in partnership, and it can be in partnership with state institutions, but it can also, sometimes it will have to be against the state, sometimes beyond the state. But I think that this is the kind of alternative that we should be looking into.
Thank you, Jose, for really pointing out another facet of what kind of alternative futures, particularly countries in the global south, must be looking at. And I'd like to focus on this takeaway that one suggestion of looking at an alternative future is to move away from this global idea of a global narrative to focusing on more local needs, local priorities, local institutions, and local stakeholders. On that note, I'm also curious to understand how specific sectors, particularly cultural and creative industries in different countries across borders, would create opportunities to really illustrate reshaping this alternative sustainable AI futures. And so at this juncture, I'd like to turn to you, Adil, to share your thoughts on how do you really think cultural and creative industries, and even if you can foreground it in the fashion or digital media sectors, how do they illustrate the opportunities for reframing or rather imagining this alternative idea of AI futures?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that's, keeps coming up in my research as well. I think the fashion and digital media, but also the creative and cultural industries in general are perfect examples because they really they not just showcase, but they really emphasize the contradictions of AI. They really make it visible. So, for example, in fashion and digital media, AI can, it can democratize creative production. It can stimulate experimentation, and in some cases, it also lowers the barriers to participation because it's a different type of literacy that in some cases is more accessible. At the same time, these same sectors, they also reveal issues around labor precarity, authorship, visibility, platform dependency, but also in terms of like global versus local, it really displays the inequalities. So in my work on digital fashion, for example, one of the most interesting things is how the concept of sustainability is used as a branding tool. So brands and platforms argue that AI fashion, for example, is a dematerial form of production because it reduces physical production. But in doing so, they also obscure the energy intensive infrastructures and the platform economies that support it. So I think one of the major mistakes that people make and that the creative and cultural industries really shows is that people treat AI as merely a technical problem, even though it includes issues on aesthetics, identities, labor relations, and social imaginaries. I think in that sense, it's kind of twofold. It's both the industry itself that showcases the limitations of AI, but at the same time, it also functions within these limitations. So it's kind of a contradiction, really. And I think we can learn a lot from that.
All right. Thank you, Adil. Moving away a little bit from now this imagination of sustainable AI futures, I'd like to take it to another step to really see how this can be implemented or rather operationalized. Because while imagination is great, putting that imagination into context and then putting that context into play would really be important. So at this juncture, I turn to now Devyani to perhaps share your thoughts on what do you think are the most immediate or actionable steps that various stakeholders can take to try to steer outcomes in this direction of alternative AI? And even if you want to foreground it in light of governance questions, that's most welcome.
Thanks, Leanne. I think my first point of my answer would be to move away from these abstract notions like responsible AI and all these guidelines or values to actual implementable ideas of how you would make AI inclusive and non-discriminative. How would you do that? How would you make it more explainable? What technology should be in place, which would require a lot more conversations between these different actors and not leaving aside civil society organizations or even the public for that matter. We recently had the India AI Summit in February this year, and inclusive AI was a very important, significant priority of the Indian government. which is great. We should have inclusivity in whatever governance arrangements that we are looking at. But how are we going to sort of achieve that inclusivity? Just a simple glance at, the documents that come out of Niti Aayog, of different private sector reports, of consultancies by McKinsey, etc. If you see the members or the stakeholders who were interviewed, we'll see that that they're skewed more towards the corporates, and maybe just one or two civil society organizations or NGOs, or even academics, just maybe one academic, right? And there's an urgent need to bring in, again, I'm going back to what Adil and Jose said, to have more voices in how AI adoption should look like. And in that vein, I'd like to say that having more sort of public surveys to just also give out information about how AI systems are sort of manufactured or will be adopted, and also to take on information about how do like people just perceive the adoption of AI, say service robots, etc. in India. Would they actually make sense? So they made a lot of sense in the context of a country like Singapore, where I've done some research, because of lower fertility rates, and lesser people being available to do work like this, something like service robots or cleaning robots. But does that really make sense in the case of India, where we are actually grappling with employment issues? These are the questions, targeted questions, that we need answers to, on how will we solve the challenge of employment when we already have AI. I think that's the first thing. So moving beyond these abstract notions of, oh, we need to have responsible AI, we need to have AI for all. Who are these all that we're talking about? What is responsible AI? And how do we actually operationalize responsible AI? I think the second point that I'd like to bring in is that whatever mechanisms the government is coming up with for the corporate sector, like audits, these should be tied to some social outcomes. So these shouldn't be just brought out as maybe playbooks, or, oh, this is what the company should be doing. No, this is what the company should be doing, and then how will it be socially desirable? So something like red teaming that companies usually do to ensure cybersecurity, or to get around the problem of hacking and cybersecurity related issues. How will that have outcomes for the use of generative AI for users like us or you and me? I think that's my second point. And I think I'll just wrap this up by saying that the crucial step towards a responsible sort of AI would be expanding this participatory governance and also public scrutiny towards AI governance frameworks, rather than having, as Jose said, the elites decide or the experts decide how AI should be governed.
Thank you,
Maybe I
Devyani. I
can,
think that was,
yeah,
sorry,
just
Adil. Yes, I think
no,
that was
that's okay.
apposite, but please come in.
Just because I think you're pointing to very important things, and I think right now most of the ways we assess AI systems is through technical performance and environmental impact. But the things that you are mentioning now, these should also be part of the assessment of AI systems, that we see also, like, what is the social impact of it and how can we actually utilize this. So yeah, I think that's very important.
All right, that's a very I think that's a very apposite point. And I'm while the conversation is going on, I'm also trying to see how our audience is engaging with us. And I noticed that there was one question on the same lines of the points that Devyani made. And perhaps, if I may invite Jose to comment on this, is that when we're looking at participatory forms of imagining alternative alternative sustainable AI futures, Devyani very rightly pointed out that it starts with also inclusion, and in rephrasing this narrative of who makes the decisions, to move from those who are just the elites and sitting at the big tables, and in fact going to those who are going to be affected parties. And there's a very interesting question by Himanka here, who says, To really, I think this is in context of inclusion and participation. He asks what kinds of societal capabilities, not only within governmental institutions or other institutions, but also within communities and civil societies, will be necessary to meaningfully negotiate sustainable AI futures. So here, I think the question is more about what capabilities are really required for these beneficiaries and affected parties to really negotiate how they would like these sustainable AI futures to be crafted or shaped. Jose, would you have any thoughts to share on this note?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's a very good and very difficult question because in the end, like I think that the problem when we were discussing digital policy, like not exactly the problem, but the challenge is that there are so many issues that we need to tackle, which go far beyond, for instance, I mean, it's a discussion of what kind of development, if we are to use this word, we want. Because like it tackles not only issues related to capacity building, to education, to agenda setting, to infrastructure, but so like it's a myriad of things that have to be tackled. So I think that the answer also has to be layered to some degree. I think that on the one hand, when we discuss about infrastructure, I think that we need to think about the processes that we already have in terms of, let's say, we're going to build a dam for building a hydroelectric power plant. Let's use this example. What kind of environmental assessment are we going to take? What kind of form of consultation we're gonna use? And I'm saying this example because it's exactly what is happening with the data center case that I'm using, which is a data center by ByteDance, the mother company of the parent company of TikTok, which is doing it with a national company, a provider of wind energy. And so they came together with the support of the government to build this. But like the indigenous community that I'm looking into, they're completely sidelined. They're completely ignored. It's as if they didn't exist. So I think that this is an example of showing like, first of all, this should not be happening. And in terms of social capabilities, the issue was that they found out they found out through the press that this was going to happen, and then they did a demonstration against this. But they also, and then like when my organization and others came to dialogue to talk to them, they wanted to know more. Like, I mean, I need to know what exactly I'm fighting against. So understanding the digital environment, understanding beyond like how it is to develop an AI model, for instance, it is important to create a critical mass in society of what exactly AI is in terms of models, but also in terms of infrastructure, in terms of its political economy as a whole. So I think that this is one thing. The other is really that we, by supporting the capacity building of the overall society, to really put them in the process, include them in the process of deciding, of drafting and designing policies. So like Brazil has been discussing AI regulation for like 5 years in Congress, and there was only one indigenous representative who participated in an oral hearing, among hundreds of other participants. So I think that this is the kind of thing that we should be looking for. Of course, that we can talk about many other issues like building capacity to help communities develop systems by themselves, small models, for instance, creating in municipalities a digital infrastructure for like cloud infrastructure, for instance, to support the community to work with it. I think that all of this can be used, and maybe now to wrap up, I think that we have examples in history that may help us. In Chile, during the Allende's government, there were many initiatives as to, for instance, how workers could govern factories by themselves. So, like, it was a strong policy that the government had. In the end, he was overthrown by U.S. imperialism. But I think that we should look into these examples and try to understand how this matches with the AI industry in order to go the other way around. Instead of thinking what AI tool we have to tackle our problems, what are the problems that we have, and if AI is a tool for that or not. And of course, we can talk about regulation, about principles, about rights, but I think that all of this should be in the conversation. Sorry, I think I spoke too much. Sorry for that.
Absolutely not. And I think our audience are really interacting with the points being made because the questions seem to be quite a right fit as a piece of a puzzle in what our panelists have to offer. And just building on what Jose, what you mentioned right now is we have a participant Preeti who is trying to prompt us to look into how we can imagine more bottom-up approaches to policymaking on AI. And here, I suppose Preeti is trying to understand how bottom-up approaches based on lived experiences of societies, communities, and individuals could really be incorporated in policymaking for AI. And here, maybe to give Jose some respite, if I could invite Adil or Devyani to comment on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the question. It's a very interesting question. I think it's also one of the central challenges in AI governance today that, the affected communities are often the least represented in decision making, even though they are often the ones that, have to bear most of the environmental and social costs. I think when it comes to lived experiences, it's a very difficult question, but from a, cultural perspective, I think we need mechanisms that include storytelling, testimony, but also everyday experiences, because I think they are crucial to include those because they often make visible like the hidden human and ecological costs of AI infrastructures. And right now, groups such as local communities, labor groups, environmental organizations, even civil societies, they are kind of always informed at the very end instead of taken into the decision making right from the earliest stage, even in the infrastructural planning. I think that's one of the major points where you can, also include these other perspectives. But yeah, I'm not an expert on governance, so maybe Devyani has also another solution to that.
No, completely agree, Adil, with you. Hi, Preeti, thank you so much for your question. An excellent question on how lived experiences should be taken into account for policy making. And something that's done in the policy sort of space is something called sandboxing, regulatory sandboxing, where you give the opportunity to AI developers and AI manufacturers to sort of experiment with whatever they're manufactured. Like I'm talking about AI systems or autonomous systems like a driverless car or service robots, and introduce that in a very controlled sort of environment so that even the people get to sort of live that experience with a robot and then decide whether they're comfortable with that or not. So perhaps this has been tried in Singapore because of their government's governance structure, and also in the US, where the US gives Uber the opportunity to have driverless cars, where they've already introduced driverless cars. But yes, a bit of experimentation on part of the governments, say like in India, would possibly help in getting more perspective on what are the challenges that would be faced if AI systems were adopted. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say. And again, I think I had this one example of this platform called gov.in, which is a platform for the government to engage with the public. So putting out more information about, say, generative AI tools, testing generative AI tools on such platforms would be way more useful for the governments to sort of get an idea about how people perceive these technologies.
All right. I think the progression of this conversation, where we started with identifying the problem and now we've come to a place of really reflecting and deliberating on solutions, seems to be very exciting. And on that note of solutions, I'd like to pose my final question. And this question is something that I'll pose to all three panelists. Is now that we're really reflecting on what solutions really can be unpacked at the governance level, at the local level, at an institutional or even community level. How do you think incentives, funding structures, or partnerships outside the state institution be designed to enforce sustainability and matters of equity when it comes to designing sustainable AI futures? Would either one of you like to go on this?
It's
We're
a
trying
good
to look at
question.
solutions.
It's
Yeah,
a
we're
good
looking at
question.
solutions outside the state institution.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's also a difficult question. I think in an ideal world, in a utopia, it shouldn't be an issue. I think if instead of, focusing on these pointers such as progress and innovation and always going and continuing, we should kind of stop, reflect, and maybe instead of growth, look at degrowth and issues of responsibility and care. And I think that this is also very much a social movement and a political movement. So I don't have a concrete solution, but I think it requires a different type of mindset, which is very difficult to do on a global level. I have to be honest. So I think also based on the question that was just asked about the bottom up, I think it comes from bottom up, from political and social movements, even grassroots movements. So yeah, not a concrete solution, but I think if we have a different mindset, then maybe we can imagine individually and collectively a more sustainable future.
Thanks, Adil. Devyani and Jose, do you have any concluding thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Adil on the mindset bit that stakeholders need to stop thinking of governance as something that comes after innovation, but they should think of governance while they are innovating. And again, that sort of, I think, wraps up the discussion in a neat way by saying how important voices are, how important listening to different stakeholders is. Yeah, I think that is what my response would be to your really difficult question, Liane.
All right.
If I may, do we still have time, Jen? Yeah.
Yes, we have about 3 minutes, so you have time.
Oh my God. Okay. So I think that, and also I think that this relates to the question concerning bottom up and thoughts on sovereignty. I think that yes, the concept of sovereignty, I think it is a violent one because it is extremely focused on the state and it relates to control over territory, authority, and etc. But I think that this concept, there's a room for rethinking this concept in a way that encompasses everything that we're talking about here in terms of participation, in terms of really sovereignty being owned by communities as a whole, by society, different social groups within a particular territory and beyond it. So I think that a part of this aspect within the digital ecosystem is to go beyond an idea of inevitabilism that technological development is already a given and that we should work with this way of doing technology for, let's say, private profit, surveillance, and etc. So I think that there's room to go beyond. And in terms of partnerships, I think that the state has a very important role to play because it is a player that can give what's the word for that? That can give scale to some social ways of innovating social solutions, bottom-up solutions. And this part of like supporting the creation of partnerships, supporting, for instance, I mean, for a social movement to have access to cloud infrastructure, its own cloud infrastructure needs support, funding. And I think that the state can, when good intention, can do that. And beyond the idea of sovereignty, once I heard, I was moderating a panel with Anna Valdivia, who is a researcher at the Oxford University Internet Institute. And she was talking about the idea of digital solidarity to replace the one on digital sovereignty. It's like, how can countries, how can communities, how can different stakeholders, especially like universities, social movements, indigenous communities, I don't know, local organizations, and also the state, why not? How can we in a solidary way work together to create decisions? So I think that we can use the concept of sovereignty by rethinking it towards an idea of solidarity. So yeah, it is still a little bit abstract, but I think that it's one way of framing this issue and with a new mindset, as Adil mentioned.
All right. Thank you, Jose. I think you have been great in timekeeping because you seem to have shared your thoughts well within time. And on that note, I wouldn't want to keep our audience or my colleagues or our very esteemed panelists waiting. And I must apologize that we couldn't take many questions from our audience, but we hope our panelists have been able to engage with them and answer them and share their thoughts on them during the dialogue. I would like to take a minute or so to wrap this very fruitful dialogue. And I think I would be remiss if I did not extend my heartfelt gratitude to all my peers who have joined me today in really unraveling this very difficult or supposedly difficult topic of conversation. And so first and foremost, I think as a researcher and an academic, I keep telling myself to inspire is really a worthy endeavor, but to be inspired is an altogether different and incomparable feeling. And I think what our panelists have brought today is really, besides food for thought, is a host of inspiring thoughts for us to take back home and reflect. And so on that note, I would like to extend a very warm thank you to Adil, Devyani, and Jose for making the time out of your very busy schedules to join us today from across the globe, for really finding the space to be open with us and to share your thoughts uninhibited on this conversation. And apart from our panelists, I would also very much like to extend my thank you to all our audiences who have joined us today, to my colleagues, Angelina, Rushali, and the rest of my team members at the Transitions Foresight Lab for joining us for today and for helping us put together this great conversation. On this note, I would like to, for all our participants who would like to stay chimed in and tuned in, please do visit our website, Transitions Research, and also engage with our social media for more such exciting events. On that note, thank you, Adil, Devyani, Jose, for joining us. It has been truly a very fruitful conversation, and we hope to keep these conversations going and to keep our networks a lot more fruitful in this regard. Thank you so much. Bye-bye and good evening or good afternoon to all of you there.
Thank you,
Thank you
Leanne.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.